Hello, everybody, and welcome to the ongoing genocide of Black Americans by the United States government. I'm excited to have you join us today. So, we're going to first get into it by saying a little bit of context what we're going to be talking about today. We aren't going to be really getting into all of the nitty gritty of every single instance. We're going to be providing a brief overview just to get you thinking about what this concept of genocide can mean and what it can look like, especially in the context of Black people and Black liberation. So what is genocide, right? Genocide is any intent to destroy, in whole or in part, ethnic, racial, or national group. It's carried out by the state or agents of the state. That is important to understand and remember, agents of the state. It can be in any accomplished in any way. So it can be accomplished through health and medicine and safety, environmental racism, state violence. It can be economic genocide, or it can be accomplished through the carceral state and through slavery, which is usually the most clear one that people would think of when they think of genocide of Black Americans. It's the carceral state and slavery, but that's the key to the word ongoing genocide. It's kind of like a slow, steady thing. And genocide is not just limited to one isolated instance or an event. It can take place over decades, centuries, and it doesn't actually need an endpoint. I think a lot of folks, when they think of genocide, they think of it has a beginning, it has an end, and there are calculated plans on how to take all of it out. Now, it is calculated. The genocide against Black folk is calculated, but I think I encourage folks to kind of open up what that could look like. It's not actually a beginning and end. I think most folks first or most familiarity with genocide is the Holocaust, which did take place between a certain period of time. But just as the effects of that continue for decades and decades, the genocide against Black Americans started it started at slavery, but it continued and evolved and grew. And so genocide doesn't necessarily need an end result to be considered a genocide. So I wanted to touch on ethnic cleansing a little bit as almost as a tool of genocide to widen our perspective a little bit. So ethnic cleansing is the deliberate removal and killing of an ethnic group in an attempt to make a region, country, whatever, completely homogenous. So think of what's happening in Palestine right now. That is an ethnic cleansing in an attempt to make that region completely ethnically homogenous. And white supremacy will extend its resources across international lines to maintain Western dominance and just the general subordination of melanated people, as you're seeing with the United States intervention in Palestine and how what they're doing there directly relates to the oppression of Black folk here in the United States. If our police forces are training the IDF police forces that are ethnically cleansing Palestine, think about how those things are connected and how a genocide can cross internationalize and cross oceans. And so white supremacists aim to ethnically cleanse the United States from Black people and all people of color. And genocide could be a tool to carry out ethnic cleansing. So again, widening your perspective a little bit and thinking about how all the things we're going to be talking about here today, how that can contribute to the general destruction and goal of white supremacy. So We Charge Genocide is a document and that came out during Jim Crow in the 1950s. It's a petition made to the UN by William Patterson on behalf of the Civil Rights Congress. And it is, this document is interesting to me. So it is a petition sent to the United Nations, basically charging the United States for genocide against Black Americans. That in itself is a little silly to me because it's like asking someone to smack you upside the head to then apologize and hold them and go turn themselves in to the police, right? You can't ask the system to hold itself accountable. But this document is interesting as a historical piece of information to kind of record out of all these instances of genocide against Black folk. And it's kind of the first, well, not kind of, it is the first real, like, hey, you're doing this to us. And this was way back in the 50s, right? So Patterson describes it as a record of mass slayings on the basis of race, of lives deliberately warped and distorted by the willful creation of conditions, making for premature death, poverty, and disease. I think the key word there, going back to our definition of genocide, any intent to destroy, not necessarily kill, but well, the long-term goal, right, is a complete like decimation, but any intent to destroy. And so Patterson brings that back here as the deliberately warped and distorted by the willful creation of conditions to destroy. And their main pieces of evidence is put in context with policing and the way that America handles policing. And so their evidence incorporates killings by police, inside of gangs, masked men at night, and the KKK, which they even know as a semi-official arm of the government. And at that time, thinking about like, while the KKK may have changed their uniforms to police uniforms now, at the time, it was way more just like, ow. And I thought it was really interesting that he separated all four of those things as if they're not the same, right? As if the incited gangs, the masked men at night, and the KKK aren't the police, or as if the police aren't the KKK and the incited gangs, right? Their clothes may be different, but their goal and their intent to destroy and kill Black people is the same. So this quote, it's a little long, but I think it really encapsulates just the idea of what genocide against Black folk can look like, and especially in the context of, again, destruction, destroying intentionally and creating conditions where we cannot thrive and live and succeed. And our evidence concerns the thousands of Negroes who over the years have been beaten to death on chain gangs and in the back rooms of sheriff's offices, in the cells of county jails and precinct police stations and on city streets, who have been framed and murdered by sham legal forms and by legal bureaucracy. It concerns those Negroes who have been killed allegedly for failure to say sir or tip their hats or move aside quickly enough, or more often on trumped up charges of rape, but in reality for trying to vote or otherwise demanding the legal and inalienable rights and privileges of United States citizenship, formally guaranteed them by the Constitution of the United States, rights denied them on the basis of race. And that, again, that's from Charge Genocide in 1951. And this quote was really interesting to me because especially the last part, and I think it really speaks to just like the time period of Black folks, Black folks in Jim Crow. And I think a lot of Black folks now, they want to be valued by the country that has inflicted all this harm. And that's where, at least at the Black Knowledge Coalition, and as we're thinking of like real radical change, it's divorcing ourselves from that idea of, again, calling on the system to hold itself accountable and wanting to participate in the inalienable rights and privileges of United States citizenship. But if you're thinking about what United States is, who the United States is, would you really want to be considered a citizen of that and be granted rights from that system that is inflicting the same harm onto you? And so the document goes on to bring attention to the just general institutionalized destruction of Black people as a backbone of American government and policy. They explain that the destruction and downfall and death of Black people is a core government policy. And they said the police is the most clear manifestation of this. Once the classic method of lynching was the rope, now it is the policeman's bullet. You see that a lot now, especially in like Black Lives Matter protests. What is happening when Black people are shot in the streets? It is modern day lynching. And so We Charge Genocide go on to say that police represent the government and they serve white America. Like white Americans, you almost exercise the police as their own personal security or their own personal weapons, because the police's goal, the police is meant to torment and kill Black people. And so if the police represent law and order and law enforcement, if murdering Black people is core to police policy, and police policy is an accurate representation of government policy and priorities, then what does that mean for our government's priorities, right? And we all know what that means. It means that Black people are not valued in any way. And not only are we not valued, but we are hated to the point where we have these conditions created for us where we just can't live, and we're regularly targeted. And so moving on a little bit to state violence and how the state can directly harm and kill. And I think this is what most people think of when they think of genocide. It's literally like people out in the street being shot in the street, which happens so much. And I want to highlight the word known lynching by the state, um, particularly because I had a professor tell me once that think of everything that you know about what Black people have been through in this country and multiply it by three, because there's so much we don't know. There's so many people whose lives have been taken from them because of white supremacy that we just probably just never know about because the coverage wasn't there, or their families were silenced when they tried to get answers. So these are just a few, just to demonstrate the magnitude and just a 6-year period of what this looks like, this genocide of us. This is just by police killings by the state, or killings by the state. And so it was Michael Brown in 2014, Sandra Bland in 2015, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile in 2016. And in 2018, at least 228 Black folks were shot and killed by police. In 2019, at least 235 Black folks were shot and killed by police. And then in 2020, we had Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade, of course, and George Floyd. And I would like to go back to Sandra Bland for a moment, because Sandra Bland's case is a little bit unique in the way where she was arrested and she was stopped at a routine traffic stop, and she was arrested and taken into custody, and she was found dead in her cell, hung. And now there's a myriad of evidence. It could be a whole session in itself with Sandra Bland's case, but it really just demonstrates how Black life is not protected and is intentionally taken as a part of the way our police function. Black folk know Sandra Bland was unequivocally killed by the police in her cell. They hung her, they killed her, but it was always ruled a suicide. But if you understand and again contextualize the genocide of Black folks, police policy is killing Black people, and therefore government policy is killing Black people. Why would Sandra Bland's life have been protected in that space, you know? And so going on to known white supremacist killings, these are the two, I feel like, key cases that when you are thinking about white supremacist killings, that everyone either thinks about or should be thinking about. So there's Emmett Till in 1955, who he was taken and beaten to death beyond recognition by a group of white supremacists for allegedly whistling at a white woman leaving a store, which just did not happen. And so his death sparked the civil rights movement. It was kind of like Black folks' final straw after everyone saw what had happened to him. And then we had Ahmaud Arbery just last year, who was killed for running in the wrong neighborhood by white supremacists. And again, emphasis on known. I could not stress enough how much we don't know about how many Black folk are just regularly kidnapped and murdered just because they're Black, right? In 2021, this is not something that just happened in 1955. I think especially not even just in the South, but everywhere, right? I think the way that our information ecosystem has been functioning, we are taught and we are conditioned to believe that this stuff happened 60 years ago. It doesn't happen anymore. I'm here to tell you that it does regularly, but we don't know about it. And so again, highlighting the word known white supremacist killings and understanding that the white supremacists and the lynching by the state, two sides of the same coin, going back to what Patterson said about mass gangs at night and the police and the KKK separating them, they are all functioning they're all playing on the same team, you know? And it's important to understand that if you are speaking about a genocide against Black people, how many actors can be functioning on behalf of the state to carry out the goal of not allowing Black people to just live. And so these murders are an extension of a government that promotes and facilitates the murder of Black people. And the carceral state they created is very unlikely to even indict these murders. You saw how everyone got excited over the George Floyd verdict. And that wasn't even all of it, right? And so Black people are killed by law enforcement officials without consequence. And if law enforcement is their title and killing Black people is part of the job description, they're representing an enforcement and manifestation of our laws. And now whether or not it explicitly says in these laws, all Black people should die. It is the fact that these bodies that are representing the government of this country are regularly murdering Black folk in the street in broad daylight, and then agents of that same government are doing the same thing and nothing is happening to them. You have to understand that this is intentional and this is being excused for a reason. And so shifting gears a little bit to kind of like broaden our perspective for a second and understand the ongoing aspects of what this genocide can look like, right? And so genocide does not, again, have to just be as literal as murdering Black people in the street. It can be almost like a slow cook and a slow death and slow destruction of our community. And so a key facet of that is environmental racism. Most folks are familiar with environmental racism, but it's any policy or practice that disproportionately affects, whether intentionally or unintentionally, a group of people or a community based on their race. And so what does that have to do with genocide, right? Black people and Black populations are more likely to live near interstates, sewage treatment plants, hazardous waste landfills, incinerators, and just other toxic facilities. And obviously, this results in increased health risks to people who live there. It is not a surprise that Black communities and Black folks face a myriad of health risks that have been passed down for generations and generations. And this is because during Jim Crow, when they were trying to reconstruct the neighborhoods and Black folks are starting to really form their own communities, right? They're slapping interstates in the middle of them, slapping interstates in the middle of the hoods, all this construction, you know? And so this caused health risk, and that those health risks got passed down, and we're living with them now. And so environmental racism, what it does is it combines public policy and industry to benefit white people and shifting the cost to Black people and people of color. And more often than not, that cost is our life. And it's really, I think it's important to understand when you are, thinking about this, obviously it sounds drastic and just so serious, right? Because it is. This is real. There's nothing light. There's no way to sugarcoat this. And so going on to like waste management, waste is a social process. It is very intentional where landfills, waste treatment facilities, all of that. So think about where those in your community are. Mine is down the street from my house. There are a big old waste facility. I have asthma. you know, a lot of folks can name where in their community their waste treatment facility is, and I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be where all the Black folk are, where all the people of color are. And so, but they don't want to, because they know the effects that can come from living down the street or blocks away, if you're in it like an urban center, from a landfill and a waste treatment facility, breathing in all that toxic air. And in white communities, the reason all the parks are over there, all the grocery stores, all the doctors, and the waste and the trash and the sewage is where all the Black people live. And so in a study conducted by the Commission for Racial Justice, it was found that 60% of Black folk live in communities where there are one or more abandoned toxic waste sites, 60%. And 3 of the 5 largest hazardous waste landfills are located in predominantly Black and Latinx communities and account for 40% of the nation's total landfill capacity. 40. So 40% of the nation's total landfill capacity is in where Black and Latinx people are. If that is not that, this is intentional placement. It was like, oh well, there just has to be a lot of space over there. Like, no, like these are again waste of the social process, and this is intentional, mixing policy, government policy, even as the local level, state level, federal level. These are calculated, intentional choices, knowing what the effects can be and not caring because it contributes to the destruction and dilapidation of our community. And so Black people are forced into lower quality standards of living and environmental threats because of our race and because this country views us as expendable and not worthy of living in a healthy and just generally productive and just somewhere that contributes to a higher quality of life, And so, like as we established, this environmental racism and these environmental circumstances can create healthcare problems. So we're going to take it back a century or so, back to the antebellum South. And in the antebellum South, and one can assume decades after. I always take, when I see a time period, when we're reading about like Black history and Black liberation, when it has an end date, I always extend that about 15 years, because as we know, when segregation ended, it didn't end everywhere right when it stopped, right? And so in the antebellum South, and suspiciously decades after, Black people were used for medical experimentation and demonstration. Like they were dummies, right? Many of whom were kidnapped, just plainly kidnapped. A lot of the literature said that they were runaway slaves. Doesn't make it better, right? Again, treating Black folk as property to be experimented on. And this experimentation was not in an effort to better understand like Black people and Black physiology. No, it was because they viewed our bodies as just like test dummies to do whatever on. And that contributed to the genocide of us. We were dying and getting kidnapped and dying from these, whether it was these experiments or not getting treated if something went wrong and all of this stuff. Now, kind of a modern adaptation of that is Black communities are being targeted to participate in medical studies and clinical trials while being incentivized with minimal financial compensation. Minimal financial compensation. If you just like drive through any hood, right, you'll see like on the bus, I don't know what the name is, the advertisements on the bus, it'll be common for you to see like, call this number, participate in like a heart study, da 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 da. When you're walking through white neighborhoods, you don't see that stuff, right? They'll call folks, they'll send things to churches, where Black churches, trying to get Black folks to participate in all these medical studies. And that creates distress in our community. And the most clear example, I think, of distrust with healthcare and medicine, and just racism in healthcare and medicine from the government, is the Tuskegee syphilis study. Now, it is a common misconception that these folks were given syphilis by the government. That did not happen. They were not given syphilis, I already had it, and they were promised treatment. That was the point. This point of the study was to see the effects of this treatment that they were going to get, but it never came. They just let Black people suffer and die, and even transmit to their children in some cases this disease, and just let it happen. Hundreds of folks, right? That in itself is gross, but it also, that is another contribution to genocide. That's just what we know about. Who knows how many other Tuskegee syphilis studies that we just don't know exist. And it's very unlikely that that was not the only time that's happened. And so going on, it not just from like disease and experimentation contributing to our death and our destruction, but also the Black maternal death rate is over 2% higher than white women. It's honestly closer to 300. It's like about 273, I think. That Black woman dying from birth, almost 300% higher, in itself is a crisis. But it's because of the medical system does not take Black people's experiences authentically. They don't listen to us. Black people's experiences with the healthcare system are overwhelmingly negative and racist. Either if we are not prescribed medication at all, because it's assumed that we'll either try to sell it for money, or we'll get addicted to it, or we don't need it because it's assumed we can handle more pain, or our concerns are just brushed off. Almost every single Black person can account instances where they went to a doctor for something serious, a health issue, and they were just brushed off. My mother, it turned out a few years ago, something happened to her hand. She like slammed it in a drawer or something. You went to the doctor. They just told her to put a brace on it. Well, it'll be fine. But it was really bothering her. Years go by. Most recently, it starts bothering her again, right? She's like, dang, like what's going on? Goes to the doctor. Turns out she fractured. She fractured her whole hand. She had a whole fracture. And they were just like, oh, slap a brace on it. Luckily it was only her hand, but imagine if it was like a more serious issue, like heart issues running in our family. If we had gone in for something as serious as like having heart palpitations or something like that, and they just didn't take our concern seriously, Black people die this way. And it is because the healthcare system is not set up where we can get the care we need, and we are dying. And that also goes on to understand how Why? So shifting the gear to what, from what to why. So why is this happening? It's because the capitalist healthcare system, it institutionalizes unequal access to healthcare for Black people. So if we're in a class system where financial capital guarantees access to quality healthcare, where do you think Black people fall? At the bottom. Not in a good place. So, like for example, if you need a Fortune 500 job in order to get the best healthcare, the best dental care, the best eyesight, right, or the best eye care, not everyone in our capitalist system, not everyone has access to that, and especially in a racial capitalist system where people of color and Black people are at the bottom. Well, all capitalist systems are to an extent racialized, but when class is combined with race, and in a country where Black people are not intended or even desired to thrive in any capacity, it's not going to be made possible for Black folk to get access to the healthcare we need without, well, just period, right? And so Black neighborhoods are at risk of several health issues, higher levels of overall mortality, premature mortality and infant mortality, asthma, respiratory issues, right? But we don't have access to the care. And so receiving care for the myriad of these issues is a crisis. And predominantly Black neighborhoods are more likely to be primary care shortage areas, offer fewer ambulatory facilities, more limited access to physicians, and just have a lower supply of surgeons in general. So we have all these issues, and we have all these medical issues, but the care is not there. And that's because we are in a capitalist, because our capitalist system is tied to our healthcare system, the inequality from the capitalist system translates to our healthcare and all other facets just of American life, and that contributes to the destruction of Black folk. And so economic genocide, I'm not going to get too much into this because I kind of talk about how capitalism can be destructive or how capitalism is destructive for Black folk and people of color in our session on capitalism and exploitation of labor. But Patterson defined economic genocide as deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction in whole or in part. So again, the word destruction. Perpetuation of economic and political power by the few through the destruction of political protest by the many. And I really like the way that you worded that. Perpetuation of economic and political power by the few through the destruction of political protest by the many. And so this economic genocide, again, in a capitalist system, racial capitalism, racialized people, Black people, are kept in the working class. They are kept in the proletariat and that is where we don't have access to healthcare, or we're living near landfills, right? It's important to understand how all of these things are connected. One cannot exist without the other. All of these things are not just random symptoms. They are all working together, you know. And so Black labor is exploited under capitalist systems, often working in tandem with the carceral state, as we know, facilitating modern slavery. The 13th Amendment didn't abolish slavery, just reimagined it. Black labor is exploited in prisons, and just all in general. There's a prison in Louisiana, the name's escaping me, but they genuinely have the people in prison there, black prisoners on chain gangs, working in fields with the warden on a horse, like it's the dang slavery times, right? That is, and getting paid pennies if at all. Most prisoners are getting paid pennies if at all for putting out fires, like in California, and just crazy stuff. And that is putting our lives in danger because we are being seen as disposable, and we are not meant to thrive. If you understand how the carceral state will disproportionately arrest and imprison Black people, and then you funnel them into these prisons where their labor is being exploited, and they're putting in unsafe conditions to funnel our economy, right? Again, all this is connected. And economic genocide can also be accomplished via wage theft. So, for example, Black domestic workers during Jim Crow, these Black women would be going to these white houses to take care of these white children and their families for 60, 70-hour weeks, right? Most of the time, they wouldn't even get paid money. they get paid in cans, okra, if like in combination with the pennies that they were supposed to get. And it was just like what could Black folk do about it? What could they do about it? Well, what they did do about it is they ended up forming mutual aid groups and unions, right? But it's hard, it's difficult to unionize as a domestic worker because it's like contracted work, right? Or it's not the same as like wage, like if you're working like in a factory at the time or something like that. And so, as you know, Black people always find a way to support each other, but this is intentional. This is intentional. Again, going back to agents of the state, agents of white supremacy. White folk who were stealing wages from the Black domestic workers were acting as agents of the state. They didn't value their labor enough to compensate them as they should be for their work. And thus, they couldn't have enough money to feed their kids and get them clothes and maybe even get them out of the neighborhood that was next to a landfill that they just put an interstate through. And so I didn't touch on the carceral state and prisons too much and slavery, just because that's going to be a future that deserves its own session. But as I touched on before, like the carceral state and slavery, I think that's slavery, especially as people's when they hear a genocide against Black folk, that's like what they think of. And I think that's like an important starting point, but it's important to understand how all of this is growing out of that, how all of these conditions have grown from that as a way to maintain those conditions, to maintain the subordination of Black folk like we saw in slavery so clear, just in this like contemporary time. And so just to summarize everything, the US government carries out its white supremacist values and agenda via the centuries-long genocide of Black people. And that can take place through the economy, through healthcare and medicine, through just genuinely shooting down Black people in the street and kidnapping them and murdering them. And this genocide is carried out by state actors and their allies. And again, heavy on allies. You do not have it doesn't have to be federal employees. You know, we were talking about the US government, but the US government will have people who align with their values and their value and their policy of killing and destroying Black people and our ability to thrive and live. If they align with the government's belief of that, they will and they have taken matters into their own hands, right? And so slavery in the carceral state is the most clear example of this, but it's important to pay attention to long-term destruction of our community that's disguised as a symptom of the system instead of the system itself. Environmental racism is often talked about as this like facet of racism, white supremacy that just happened to come about, when it's not. It is an intentional part of the system itself, right? And so you would not have the medical issues that we have without environmental racism, but you wouldn't be able to get access to healthcare if it wasn't for if it wasn't for the capitalist systems that's being fueled by the carceral state and the exploitation of labor of Black people. And like all of it is connected. And I think the more that we understand how it is connected, the more we're able to unify behind that. That is what We Charge Genocide was trying to do. And that is what it did do. Now, I think it's funny that, again, they brought to the United Nations what the United States was doing as if they're going to do something about it. They didn't do anything about it. But it is, again, a good just historical document to see and to kind of trail the acts of genocide and see where it started. And again, that was 1955 or 1951, excuse me. That document that could have been written in 2021. And if that in itself goes to show how this genocide is ongoing, and it is just that, a genocide. These conditions, if conditions have not changed since 1951 to 2021, I'm making this presentation right now. It is ongoing. It is a genocide. Genocide is a serious word, and it is not used lightly. It is accurate. That is what's happening to us. And so, as we are thinking about Black liberation and doing more reading about like what Black radical thought can look like, understand that, understand how all of this is not just by happenstance. These are not symptoms of the system, but it's the system working on purpose. So we're going to move into our discussion, and I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.